You need to build a business that is unique. It is yours. You can cut and paste parts from other people, but it's not cookie cutter. You're going to have to think through how it works for your business.
Welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, where host and renegade thinking beer brewing lawyer turned online entrepreneur Bobby Klinck proves that building and protecting your online genius doesn't have to be rocket science. Bobby and his expert guests break down online marketing and the legal stuff so you can stop sweating the small stuff and get back to building your amazing business. Now, here's your host, Bobby Klinck.
Hey there. Welcome to episode 56 of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klinck, and I'm excited for today's show. In today's show, we're taking a step back from the content strategy theme that we've been going through over the last few episodes. Because, look, it's the year end. It's the end of 2018. And that means it's time to do some planning for next year, for 2019. As entrepreneurs, we need to make sure that we find time in our year, in our schedule, to plan for the next year, to plan for things that are to come in our business. It's the working on your business, not working in your business. Or from the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it's kind of quintessential quadrant 2 activity. It's really important, but it's not urgent. But the fact that it's not urgent doesn't mean that we don't need to be doing it. Given how important it is, doing this on a regular basis is a key to success. And so obviously year end and the beginning of a year is a great time to do this. It's a time that everyone's thinking about it. So I wanted to go through the process myself. I do it every year, but I also thought that, we needed to, it'd be helpful if I did it with you to help you understand what I learned this year, what I, did right, what I screwed up. What are some lessons that I've learned that I can apply going forward and hopefully help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made this year and that I see other entrepreneurs making on a regular basis? Because there's no reason for you to make a mistake if you could learn from me and avoid it in the first place. So that's what we're going to be doing today. It's my 2018 year in review. I'm going to go over what I've learned, what went right, and all of those other things, but also, what I screwed up, and I'm going to be candid about it. But before we dive in, this week's episode is again brought to you by the Online Genius podcast community over on Facebook. Again, if you tuned in last week, this is more of those loops I was talking about. I love coming to you every week in this podcast, but I also like having a chance to actually connect with you, to talk with you one-on-one, to answer questions, to go deeper, to do all of those things. And that's what the podcast community allows us to do. You can get in absolutely free. You can interact with me. I'm in the group. I encourage people to tag me if they have questions. Other people help. The entrepreneurs in the group help each other as well. It's about 2,000 members right now. And you can join by heading over to youronlinegenius.com/community. Again, youronlinegenius.com/community. And when you go there, you just make sure to answer the questions. It's a Facebook group. You answer those questions and I will let you in. So that's that. Now let's go ahead and dive into the meat of this episode. And then this episode is a little bit different because it's not going to be a typical, there's 4 things I'm going to cover. I'm going to kind of go through a bit of an outline here of different things or thoughts and ideas that came to my mind when I was thinking about how to structure this. And I think the place to start is to give an overall theme to the year, to kind of think through what was this year about. When I do these reflections, I often do that. I often say, okay, what was this year's theme ended up being in review? Maybe I'd set an intention I had, and maybe you did. But what I will tell you is that even if I've set an intention, often when I look back, I will see some other themes or trends. And for me, 2018 was about figuring it all out. That's the way I kind of put it together. And what I mean by that is that in the years before that, in 2015, 2016, 2017, I had been learning a lot of the technical skills and the ideas behind online entrepreneurship, online marketing, etc., but I hadn't yet figured out how to put all the puzzle pieces together. So for example, I knew the concept of inbound marketing. I knew the concept of building a list and emailing your list. I knew about sales funnels. I knew about landing pages. I knew about all of that all those different things. I knew about online courses and podcasting and all of these different things. But candidly, they were technical skills I had without a framework before this year. This is the year, 2018, was the year that I was able to actually see how all of the different pieces fit together into one coherent puzzle. And it's when I was actually able to put it all together into a meaningful business that actually has a good trajectory going forward. So that's what the theme of the year was for me. And I want to, after talking about the theme, I want to give you some key metrics. And again, I'm being absolutely candid in this. I'm giving you these details because I think it's important. And some of it, is a bit embarrassing to admit, but I'm going to admit it anyway. So at the start of 2018, and I don't have this number exactly because I didn't write it down candidly, but I think my email list was about 600 people or thereabouts. But here's what I'll say. They weren't engaged. And many of them probably weren't relevant to what I did because I had my law firm business where people could download a free ebook or a couple of different ebooks that quite honestly aren't relevant at all to what I do. So a lot of the people on the list were from there. And so they weren't relevant. They weren't potential customers, etc. And I wasn't emailing people on a regular basis. The only stuff I ever emailed them was promotions. And I didn't even do that very often. So as a result, I didn't have a connection with them. I wasn't getting high open rates. I wasn't actually connecting with people in any real way on my email list. But here's the other fact I want to tell you. At the beginning of January, so January 1st, 2018, I had sold exactly $0 in online products in my entire career as an online entrepreneur. I had used the concepts to work with my law firm to build some things there, but I had never sold an online product. I had tried and failed. I've told this story many times of my first course launch that I spent close to $10,000 in Facebook ads to get people to come to webinars. And then I sold one and that person asked for a refund. So that was my experience, candidly, as of January 1st. But also I want to share what the stats were for this podcast. This podcast launched, I believe it was December 5th, but it was the beginning of December of 2017. And as of December 31st, I had a grand total, you're going to love this, of 184 downloads. And that was for something like, I think there were 6 or 7 episodes by the time, because I launched with 3 and there were a few after that. So I had gotten probably my dad, my brother, some friends, and, a few different people to download an episode here or there. But I didn't have any real following for this podcast yet. And it was not something that seemed to be a great trajectory. So that's where I was at the start of the year. Now I want to tell you the stats of where I am or where I will be by the end of December based upon just kind of reasonable projections for December, because I'm recording this towards the end of November, so I don't have the final stats yet. But I expect that by the end of the year, I will have right around 4,500 people on my email list. And what I want to tell you is I have culled, I think, 2,200 or 2,500 people personally that I have removed from my list this year. First, I did some during the GDPR process, but then I did a list scrub. And so I have eliminated 2,200 to 2,500 people. I don't know the exact stats here, but it's somewhere around there. So if I hadn't done that, I could have a list of somewhere around 7,000 people, but I chose to eliminate those people who were not engaging, weren't opening, weren't ever clicking. And that list is engaged. I regularly get responses from people. I regularly get feedback from people. I get high open rates. I get good click rates. And these are people who, I don't know everybody on the list, obviously, but I believe that they are all people who are relevant to my business now. So I went from 600 people not engaged, many of them not relevant, to 4,500 after I chose to cull a lot. And these are people who are engaged and relevant. That's a pretty good increase in a year. I'd like to do better, but it's a good increase. Now we're going to turn to sales. By the end of the year, I expect to have sold $175,000 in products online. Now I have my consulting work, my service work. I'm not going to include that here, but products alone. So those are almost exclusively templates, and I had a membership, etc. But ultimately it's basically selling my legal templates, has generated $175,000 in sales by the end of the year. That's what I'm projecting based upon my kind of run rate now. So again, I went from 0 to 175. And I'll also tell you that candidly, it's not even a full 12 months because realistically, I think the first sales came in April, but even April was pretty small. It's really May when I started. So I've done $175,000 in approximately 8 months. So if you annualize it, that's about $250,000 on an annual basis in sales of products. That's pretty darn good in my book, especially going from 0 to 250 is a pretty good thing to do. Now, as for my podcast downloads this year, I expect my number will be about 14,000 total episode downloads. Obviously, since I told you that in a month last year, I'd only gotten 184, you can kind of guess it's been trending up. I'm at a pace now where on a monthly basis, I tend to get about 2,000 downloads, and that's growing. So you can see that that's starting to also grow and become a much better trend line. So those are my starting stats and my ending stats. Obviously, a very different end of the year than it was the beginning of the year. So that's kind of where I am if you look at numbers. But realistically, the big piece and the reason why I say this is my year of figuring it all out, and the big reason why I was able to make those changes in my overall kind of business performance is that this is the year that I finally figured out my business model. Now, if you remember back on episode 47, I talked about kind of setting the foundation for your business, and we talked about a lot of things you need to figure out. And candidly, at the beginning of this year, I didn't really have hardly any of that figured out. So I had no idea what I was going to sell. At that point, I thought I was going to sell courses. I'd tried a course, it hadn't worked, but I thought that's what it was. I was still trying to sell that at the time. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm going to sell a masterclass series. So kind of a series of trainings. And what I'll say is I didn't even have individual legal templates available for sale until March or April. It was the first time I launched my website forms. That was the only thing I had available. And I didn't launch, I don't think, the other forms for sale until May or June. So I hadn't figured that out yet. At the time, I was not selling forms. I was selling packages, is what I thought. That was not good. I mean, that's where I thought I was, but I wasn't sure. I also didn't really have a marketing plan in place that had any real semblance of logic to it. I was doing a, throw the spaghetti up on the wall and see what sticks type of approach. I was, for example, in 2017, I had spent a bunch of money paying podcast booking services to book me on podcasts, but a lot of the podcasts I was booked on really weren't relevant. Part of that was because I didn't really know who I served. I hadn't really figured it out completely, even in 2017. But also it was because I was just saying, here, get me booked, and I wasn't taking the lead on it. So it was not something that was, happening with any systematic approach. But other than that, I mean, I had the podcast, but again, like I said, I had 184 downloads in a month, so not something that I was really figuring out. I had a Facebook page, I believe, but I don't remember how many followers or how many people had liked the page or followed the page, but it wasn't a bunch. And I wasn't doing anything really on it. And I wasn't engaging with people anywhere. I didn't have an Instagram account, didn't have anything on Pinterest. I didn't have anything else. I really didn't have any idea what I was going to do. At the time, my marketing strategy was before a launch, I paid a Facebook ads person to help me build my list, and then I tried to sell those people. And that was it. I mean, that really was kind of what I did, other than these interviews that didn't really get me much. So that's where I was in terms of marketing plans. And then in terms of a content strategy, I had the concept of having this podcast, but I didn't really have anything else worked out. My content calendar was random. I hadn't come up with content pillars or the hubs that I talked about in last week's episode. I hadn't thought through how best to organize things and sequence things. I was just doing whatever I could. And quite honestly, it was based more on who I could get to come on for an interview and when I could get them. And that was kind of how my content calendar worked out, which is not the ideal way to do it. At the beginning, you kind of have to do a little of that if you're going to be doing interviews because, when you're starting a podcast, you don't necessarily, you can't just say, oh, I want so-and-so to come and be my guest unless you know them, et cetera. So I hadn't done any of that. So it was a very hit or miss strategy. So now let's fast forward to today. I sell one thing. I sell legal templates. I don't sell anything else. I give everything else away. The only thing I'm going to sell you are legal templates. So I know what I'm going to sell you. I know how I'm going to sell it. I know, the methods of sales that are going to work. And I'm going to talk through how that wasn't necessarily an automatic, boom, overnight I got that. It took me a while even this year to figure it out. And I'm going to talk about the missteps on that in a bit. I also have a pretty solid marketing plan that involves email marketing on a regular basis, but also I've got the funnels set up and the sequences and the welcome sequences and all of those things set up now so that when someone signs up for my list, there is a thought through process. I have thought through the messaging they're getting from the first moment they interact with me through everything. Some of it nurtures directly to a sale. Others of it kind of nurtures them to become, getting to know, like, and trust me. The point is, it's all thought out. I also have a solid social media strategy that involves having the community that I obviously mention at the beginning and end of every episode. I do Facebook Lives to try to, kind of warm up an audience. I have an Instagram presence. I have someone handling Pinterest, which, we call social media, but it's not even really social media. But that's, what it is. But more importantly, I'm engaging with people. At the beginning of the year, what I would have called social media was trying to collect followers. I was doing this Twitter strategy I'd learned somewhere where you literally just follow and unfollow and try to get a bunch of followers. And I don't know, I had 30 or 40,000 followers or people who followed me on LinkedIn, but I didn't interact with them. I tweeted, I didn't get engagement. So they were real, but not real. And this year I've shifted and now I engage with people online. I engage with people in Facebook groups. I'm a known presence in other people's groups because I offer help to them and I'm there and I show up. And so that has meant that now I'm the go-to person for legal stuff in certain groups because people have figured that out about me. So that's the social media strategy I've developed. And I have a content strategy that we kind of talked about in last week's episode, which is, the looped theory of kind of bringing people all back to multiple places, multiple touch points with the podcast, with my videos, with all of this different stuff. And I'm doing it systematically and thoughtfully. I'm doing themes and hubs and all of those concepts so everything makes sense and makes sense in light of what I sell, which are my legal templates. So again, you can see I've figured out what I needed to figure out about my business over this year. So from there, I want to kind of talk about the process of how that happened. And this isn't going to be chronological, but it kind of is. But it's really what I'm going to talk about is kind of the best decisions that I made. And each one of them, though, has kind of its own missteps because I'm going to talk about in almost all of these areas, it was maybe, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or sometimes it was 2 steps back, 1 step forward, and then it took me a while to figure it out. But I'm going to talk about how I figured these things out. And so the first decision I made was one that I made last year on New Year's Eve. I was sitting in church. The pastor was talking about giving, and I said, you know what? Giving is going to be one of my words for 2018. And so I had heard about this concept of setting an intention for the year. And so I kind of set it as my intention. And I have to admit to you, though, at the beginning of the year, I didn't really know what it meant. And this is one of my missteps. At the beginning of the year, I thought of giving as something you do, not as who you are. I was looking at it as a tactic. And that's no bueno. It's just never going to work, right? But we've all heard this concept that you need to be a giver. You need to give, and that builds reciprocity and all that. And so I was coming at it from a very intellectual standpoint. And, it didn't work. And what I believe is that if you approach giving as a tactic, as something that you're doing to try to get reciprocity, it's not going to work because you're viewing it as a transactional thing. And the honest truth is people will sense that. Another way that I was kind of giving was because I was giving because I was afraid to ask for money. And so the best example of this is at the beginning of the year, I decided I was going to offer a masterclass series. It was going to be a certain number of trainings every week. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to use a pay what you want model. I told myself that I was doing this because I wanted to give access to people who couldn't afford to pay, some number I would set or whatever it would be. But realistically, it was because I was afraid to set a price. I was afraid to say this is worth X. I just wanted to give people the option to decide what they wanted to pay. And they were then the ones who did it. And I couched it as this I want to give. But you can see it really wasn't. So that's kind of my false start. But then over the year, I really transitioned to a very different place. And it all started, I can remember the day I was in a pop-up Facebook group run by Amy Porterfield. And it was for people thinking about signing up for Marie Forleo's B School. And Amy's community manager, Angie Klein, who I attribute much of my success to this year, because of this one decision she made. She decided that they were going to run an engagement contest. They were going to have awards that you could get, and the person who engaged the most would win. And me being a type A lawyer, I decided I was going to do that. I was like, heck yeah, I'm going to win this damn thing. And that was kind of my thinking. And it was purely that. But obviously, there was only so much kind of legal stuff I could help people with. So I was going to have to engage in other ways. And so I found myself giving in a lot of other ways. I gave, that knowledge I'd built up. Remember, I talked about this is the year I put it together because last year and the year before, I'd learned a bunch of skills. So I was helping people with things related to online marketing, not about the legal stuff. But then I also said, hey, I got to get, I wanted to make sure I was engaging a lot. So I became a cheerleader and I became someone who was encouraging. And that moment changed things for me. I will, honestly say before that, I was never someone who was a cheerleader, had never done it. And I found that giving even people who were strangers, people I'd met only online, this kind of pleasure and support and all of those things made me happy. I was getting nothing out of it, but it made me happy. And so I continued to do it through the year. So that was what started it, but then it continued. So, sitting here today and through the year, really, I got to the point that I just started naturally giving things away. And when I did that, that had a huge impact on my business and on my life. So again, the first big step here was when all of this GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, was coming out, a lot of people were confused about it and didn't know what was going on. And I had to figure it out for my own business. So I dug into it. I read everything I could. I applied my lawyer brain. I said, okay, I'm going to create a training for my group. I had a Facebook group at that point. I said, I'm going to do it. And so I created that and I gave it to them. And it was 3 different sessions. The first 2 were about an hour long. And then the one after that was, 30 minutes. So it was like 2.5 hours of me on video doing training with slides, with everything, really kind of diving in and making this stuff understandable. And so I just said, I'm going to give this away. A lot of people at the time, lawyers and people in this space, were trying to capitalize on this. They were going to offer a course that they would charge you for. Or, they would do a training on a webinar, but only so that they could then sell you something. So I'd taken a very different approach than most people. And that was the first time that I made this decision. And it was, again, a pivotal moment in my business. Because Amy Porterfield heard that I was doing that, and that's why she had me on her podcast to talk about GDPR, to give her, tribe a lesson and to apply this. And then not only that, she broke her rule and said, I'm going to send people directly to your training because it's so good. And so I got all those leads. So that was a huge pivotal moment. And it was only because I gave. And so I've continued to do that. I lend a hand on tech issues. I often dive in and help people work through tech issues or work through funnel issues, things that have nothing to do with anything I sell, but I figure the world's going to pay me back. And I've shifted my business model. Again, this I'm going to talk to in a bit. but I've shifted my business model so that I now give away all my training. The training that I used to charge for, where I walk people through the legal issues, it's all free. The only thing you have to pay me for now are templates. Everything else you can get from me for free. And that is a shift as well. Most of the lawyers in the space, you get that training, as part of a paid course. Or there will be blog posts, et cetera, that you can get for free. But I have a systematized training portal called the Academy where you can go and learn all this stuff, separated into modules about starting your business, naming your business, your website, written agreements, all of these different things, and then intellectual property, which is a big issue. So all of that stuff is broken out, and I give it to people for free. And again, I believe that is an important shift because, quite honestly, there are reasons for me to do it. It benefits me, but it's also, helping people and serving people. So that's one of the big shifts in myself and my business. I'm no longer going to set giving as an intention for the year because I don't have to. It's just become who I am at my core, and I will never change that. And that's always going to be part of me and my business from here on out. So the next kind of big decision that I want to talk about that has been pivotal in my business is that I decided to invest in myself by paying for various training programs this year. Before this, I'm trying to remember what I had done. I think I'd maybe taken one or two relatively inexpensive online courses before this. When I tried to launch that course before, I did it without taking a course about how to create courses or launch. And, that I think maybe is part of why it didn't work. But, this year I decided I was going to invest in myself. Ironically, the first investment I made was a detour and was a mistake. And it was also the most expensive investment I made in myself. I call it my high ticket detour. I think it was late January or early February, I signed up for this group coaching program or I don't know exactly what you call it, but let's call it a group coaching program where they teach you how to create a high ticket offer. And as you can imagine, since they're teaching you how to do a high ticket offer, it is in fact a high ticket program. They charge you quite a bit to do it. It was really expensive. And then following their process, I put a lot of money into ads, and I did more than other people because I had it available, but I was like, I'm going to put money into ads. Overall, between everything I did in that course, between the program fees, the ads, the software, et cetera, I think it cost me about $15,000. And I sold exactly $0 from it. I didn't make a single sale. There was nothing close to a sale. There was nothing that came anywhere close to it. Now, I think there were some fundamental problems here. Number one, and this is what why I refer to it as my kind of high ticket detour. In business, you need to figure out what is your blue ocean. How are you going to do something that creates a true differentiation? It positions you differently. Well, as a lawyer, having a high ticket program is not a differentiator. I mean, that's just what lawyers are. Lawyers are naturally high ticket. We are naturally expensive. So for me, the challenge to create a blue ocean product was to come up with a legal solution that wasn't expensive, that actually was attainable and accessible to people who don't have thousands of dollars, rattling around in their seat cushions. And so that was part of the problem with it. I think part of the problem was also that it didn't fit me personality-wise. The notion of a high-ticket program, you're going to do a sales call with people, and you're going to have to really dig deep and I don't want to call it high pressure, but you're going to have to try to close people to give you thousands and thousands of dollars on the phone. And my problem was the people I was getting on the phone, were not people who I would feel comfortable doing that with. Partly because they didn't need the whole program, partly because I could tell they didn't have $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to pay me, and I didn't want them to go into debt to do it. I just don't believe in that personally. So it was not a good fit for me. So that was my first diversion. So you might say, wow, you invested in yourself and that was a mistake. Yeah, except I learned what not to do, right? So I don't consider it a mistake. I learned that that's not my business model. But the other investments I made in myself have paid off in spades. The first was that I signed up for B School it's Marie Forleo's program that she does every year. And I signed up through Amy Porterfield. She had an affiliate link. That was hands down the best decision I made all year long. It shifted my business in fundamental ways, partly because it made me do the fundamental work of figuring out what business I was in, figuring out how I was going to market, all of those things that I talked about up front. B-School forced me to do that. It was also good for me because I was surrounded by a bunch of entrepreneurs who were coming at this from a perspective similar to mine, but also they happened to be my ideal customers. So I got to sit there and listen and be a fly on the wall, right? So I got to listen to what these people said in a couple different groups. One was Marie's, and then another was that Amy Porterfield had a group for her people who signed up through her. And so I got to interact with all of these different people, and I got to actually get insight and understand. And that's in addition to the curriculum and learning and all of that I was able to do. So that was a fantastic decision. Next, I signed up for Amy Porterfield's Webinars That Convert. I knew how to do a webinar. I'd gone through some webinar training in different places, but I said, you know what? I'm going to invest in myself. Again, a great decision. You know, the method that she taught me for actually going through a webinar fit with me better. Unfortunately, by the time you're listening to this, I believe she's taken it. It's no longer available for sale. She's creating a new product that combines her two signature courses, Courses That Convert and Webinars That Convert, into kind of one big called the Digital Course Academy. You know, if you're thinking about creating an online course, I would highly recommend you look at it. It's going to be, I think, launching in January. So I'd definitely give it a look if that's part of your plan for next year. But Webinars That Convert, again, a huge shift for me, a very meaningful change in how I approached webinars. And it fit with my giving mantra as well. Then later, towards the end of this year, I signed up for an email mastermind. It's a program created by Tarzan K, who's a copywriter, but it was basically about getting your email, kind of all the back end of your email system whipped into shape, creating all your sequences, your welcome sequence, your confirmation email, all of those things, and getting them set up, getting your tagging setting up, getting all of that done so you have your emails kind of clicking in the background. It's been fantastic and I love it. And that was a huge help. It also helps that I get to interact with a wonderful copywriter in Tarzan, but also a lot of the other folks in that group are great copywriters as well. So that's been a huge help to my business, to my writing, etc. So investing in myself, even though the first step was a mistake and didn't work out, was a bit of a misstep, I don't regret it because the other investments I've made in myself this year have been huge, and I'm going to continue that next year. So that was the second big piece, was investing in myself. Now, the next decision I made, and I call it decision, I don't know if it's a decision, but the next thing that I did that, you know, I did right, but I'm going to talk about what I did wrong first, was for the first time this year, I found the right mentors, the right people to follow. Now, in my space, in the online entrepreneurship world, I like to think that there are kind of two big groups. There are the folks who came to online entrepreneurship because they want to make money. That's why they do it. They're kind of agnostic or indifferent about how they do it. And what I mean by that is they don't have a passion for a particular subject matter or a passion for a particular, you know, service or product. So they are people who are just, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I want to make money. I got to figure out how to do it. Then the other camp are the people who have a calling to serve people in a particular way and want to use online entrepreneurship as a way to expand their reach. So those are kind of the two camps I like to think about it. It's not really camps, and there's obviously kind of a continuum rather than that. And you can kind of tell a difference when you go to an influencer. If an influencer is marketing based upon money and how much money you're going to make, and if they have Lamborghinis and private jets and all those things in their marketing, they're people who are marketing to that first group, the people who want to make money, and that is their why. And up to this year, those were the people I was following. And I want to be clear, there is nothing wrong with that approach. And most of those influencers have a calling for what they do. And a lot of those, you know, they are doing great things. Unfortunately, a lot of their followers, or not a lot, but some of their followers are the people who give online marketers a bad name. One group I was in, it was a Facebook group that people were using, you know, were developing basically marketing systems and kind of websites and things like that for people, but doing it for people in the offline world. And they were charging people thousands of dollars to do that. And then they would come into this group and say, hey, this isn't working. Why isn't it working? And they would post a link. And I would go onto this website and I would say, this looks like a third grader built it. And you're charging people thousands of dollars for this. Well, you can imagine that because I'd been following those kinds of people and spending a lot of time with those kinds of people, I was kind of burned out and I was kind of skeptical and I was kind of cynical about what was happening in the online entrepreneurship world. Now, I want to be clear, there were a lot of good people in that group too, but there were some bad apples. Well, this year, I happened to make a shift. And again, it wasn't necessarily this intentional thing, but I made a shift and started following and spending time with the entrepreneurs, the influencers who have a calling to do a particular thing. And that's who their followers are. Maybe you want to call them, the heart-centered entrepreneurs, but they aren't people who are in it just for the money. They're the people who are, they want to serve first, and they understand the more people they serve, the more money they're going to make. And so they make a lot of money. A lot of them do. And they don't apologize for that. And there's nothing wrong with making a lot of money, but they want to serve. Well, that model fits me better. Right? Because I'm not in this just to make money. I'm in this to serve because I've seen what happens to people if they don't get their legal stuff protected. So making that shift meant that all of a sudden I was renewed, I was feeling better, but more importantly, I'm in the right group of people because the people in that first group who just want to make money and who are, jumping from idea to business, quite honestly, they don't care about their legal stuff. They don't do it because they're not in it for the long haul. They're not looking past the next dollar, or at least a lot of them aren't. And so when I was trying to market to those folks, trying to sort through the people who, legitimately cared and legitimately really wanted to get stuff right, and people who were never going to care because, hey, if they had legal problems with this business, they'd just go start a new one. So, that was part of the problem. Whereas now I'm around people who really want to serve and be here for the long haul because they have a calling. And so naturally I'm with my customers a lot more. So there was that added benefit. Now, the next decision I made, and it took me way too long to get there, is that I sell legal templates. That's all I sell. Right now, everything else is free. I give you the training, I give you my guide, I give you guides, I give you everything else. And this is partly about me being a giver, right? I just feel better about it. But it's also candidly the right decision from an economic standpoint or from kind of a business practices standpoint when you look at my business. My customers want the solution. They want the templates. They don't necessarily care about getting all this information. And more importantly, they don't even know they need the templates half the time until they get the education. So in some sense, trying to sell them packages that had the information and the templates was kind of shooting myself in the foot because I had to do all kinds of try to educate them about why they needed it. And, that was never going to work. Whereas if I just give them the training, people will still buy templates from me. People will still buy the solution after they get the information. And so that shift was huge for me. It also sets me apart, right? Because I'm the guy who gives all kinds of stuff away. Literally, there was someone, on Instagram who put this Instagram post out talking about how sometimes, she doubts herself and she's not sure about this, but then she looks at me and says, I go to this guy because I know I can trust him because he gives so much away. And so that validated it and kind of warmed my heart. Again, I'm doing it to serve, and I figure the universe is going to pay me back, and it has. But I want to tell you, it took me 9 months to figure this out. Now, I don't mean that it took me 9 months to start selling forms. I started selling my legal templates for websites. I think it was the very end of March, but really the beginning of April. I didn't even launch the other templates until like June or thereabouts. But up to that point, I was focusing on selling a membership, which I called it a membership, but really it was an online course because you had to commit for a year at the beginning and the real value was in the training modules and the templates, right? That's what I was selling. And, there was some ongoing training, et cetera. And here was the thing. I was spending 80% of my marketing dollars, if not more, and 95% of my marketing time trying to sell the membership. After the initial launch, which again, which sold well, I did quite well in the launch. I started doing weekly webinars, and I was spending thousands of dollars every single week to get people signed up for those webinars. And my statistics were horrible. My show up rate was, often at 10% or 15%. So I'd pay something like $10 to $15 often. But I think on average, we were paying about $10 to $12 to get people to sign up for the webinar. And then only about 10% of them would show up. So for everybody who showed up to the webinar, I'd paid $120 or thereabouts. So you can kind of imagine it was kind of disheartening. It was not a good time, but that's what I was doing. And that's where I was spending my money. That's where I was spending all of my, efforts. And the forms were just kind of, okay, fine. Yeah. I mean, they were sitting in the background so people could go get them if they wanted to. Now, in September, an entrepreneur friend of mine kind of, we started talking. She's Jillian, who helped me with my content strategy and some other things. But she looked and she said, look, I think you're missing the boat here. You should focus on the forums. That's what people want. And at that point, it was because I was thinking about creating some courses and doing some other things. And she just kind of gave me a slap across the face and said, get your head out of your ass. You need to be focusing on the forums. And she told me that on an intuitive level. And so I said, well, let me go look at the numbers. And candidly, I'm ashamed to admit, I had not really looked at the numbers before this and really done the comparison. Again, it had been 4 months, 5 months at that point, I guess, that I've been doing it. So May, June, July, August. Yeah, about 4 full months. So 4.5 months I've been at it. And so I went and looked. And here's what I found. Although the membership was 80% of my dollars and 95% of my time, it was only 35% of the revenue that was coming from these product sales. And then the templates, which were an afterthought. I wasn't actively marketing them. I think there was only one thing that I ever really marketed at all, and I didn't do it actively. It was just kind of part of my sequence at the end of a lead magnet. That was 65% of my revenue without really trying to do anything, without making a concerted effort. And so I looked at it and said, okay, yeah, she's right. I should be focused on the darn forms. And so that's then when I decided to shift things. I was not going to do a course, and again, here's where I pivoted and here's where I'm good. At the time, I had already started talking to people and saying I was going to create a course and done some course validation calls. But I said, King's X, nope, I'm not doing a course. I sell templates. And I've committed I'm not going to launch any kind of course, any kind of anything until I go through at least 4 launches of my signature template library, which I'm launching quarterly. So a whole year is going to go by. Basically all of 2019, all I'm selling, unless something monumental happens, the only thing I'm selling of my own products are my forms, my templates, and my template library. And that's it. So that's, a big shift that I've made. It took me a long time to figure that out, but I think the shift works. It makes sense. It means I'm no longer chasing. I'm no longer trying to come up with a new product. And no, I know what my product is. I know what I sell. Now I'm just doing the content marketing, the marketing, and the sales. So that was a huge shift. Now, the next decision or shift I made is that I stepped to the forefront of my brand. I got to be honest, this didn't happen again until August either. For a long time, I was hiding. It was Your Online Genius, and Bobby was in the background. The podcast was all about that. I was interviewing people. I always joked, why would you want to listen to me talk about this? Ironically, there were signs that I should have figured out before then. My most popular kind of podcast, right after the launch, meaning like when you looked at stats in the first week after launch of a podcast, by far the most popular one I did was when I did an overview of my launch, my first launch that I did in May. And I did that overview and people loved it. They liked hearing from me. They liked hearing about my journey. And I said, but I didn't really do that until August. So I now have stepped to the forefront and, I tell personal stories, sometimes funny, sometimes making fun of me in my emails. I'm doing mainly solo episodes these days. I'm redoing my website as we speak, and it's got my personality. It's no formality because I am not a formal guy. There's a little bit of cussing even in the website, in my emails there is, because that's who I am. I'm not doing it because I'm trying to generate attention. That's who Bobby is. I don't do it on the podcast because I don't want the explicit notice or whatever, but I'll tell you, in real life, I use the S word, I do. And so I'm opening up and actually being myself. And if people don't like me, hey, great. You can go find someone else who doesn't do that. But that's who I am. And I don't take myself too seriously either. So if you want a lawyer who takes himself too seriously, again, I'm not your guy. So I'm doing that more. And then the last kind of shift or decision I want to talk about is that I decided to get serious about my copywriting skills. And here I mean writing copy, meaning writing things to sell. Let me be blunt. At the beginning of the year, I sucked at copywriting. I still wrote like a lawyer. I was too formal. I was too stiff. There was no real emotion. The only way I knew to kind of add any kind of emotional triggers or to try to add emotional triggers was to talk about horror stories, like talk about, your business could, do that. And it's funny when I look back at my webinars, it had all these like bombs and all that. And it was all this scare tactic because that's the only way I knew to connect with people. I don't do that anymore because I connect with people by actually being myself. And it's happened over time. I've read books. I've made a conscious effort to do that, but I study by looking at what other people have done. And then, like I mentioned, I'm working in that mastermind with Tarzan K, but also I had her help me draft up a sales page. And so seeing that process has helped, and I have found my voice. So now my writing has gotten so much better. I've ditched the formal. I'm connecting with the audience. People literally email me telling me they enjoy things. I had a guy email me, a month or two ago, saying that I am the best marketer in his inbox. And this is a guy who's an online entrepreneur. So that's saying something. I'm not saying I'm the best in his inbox, but he said that. So evidently I'm doing something right. And it's all because I decided to focus on copywriting. You need to do that too. If you haven't yet, you've got to find your voice and get better at that. So those are kind of the big shifts, but I do want to walk through very quickly 3 big lessons that I've learned this year. And it's lessons that kind of I was making this mistake, but then I've also seen other people make the mistake. So the first lesson is that marketing and online entrepreneurship is not cookie cutter. And what I mean by that is you can't just say, I'm going to copy what this person does. And a lot of people do that. And Emily Hirsch, who I've had on the show, she's a Facebook advertising person. She has a podcast called The Hirsch Marketing Underground, and she rails about this a lot, and I love that she does. She talks about how people with Facebook ads and sales funnels just want to just copy what someone else has done. And she said, you can't do that because your business isn't the same. And I see that a lot of people doing that. And I even almost did that. For example, when I was going to start doing courses, right? I mentioned that before I shifted to the templates. Part of the reason was because Amy Porterfield is the person I follow the most. She is, in a sense, my most important kind of mentor online. And she teaches people how to create courses. That's what she does. And so I was saying, okay, she does that. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, I wasn't like some people. I know some people who literally say they want to copy everything she does, meaning they want their pop-ups to look identical like hers. They want their website to look like hers, etc. And people do it with all of these influencers, right? They say, this is my person. I'm going to follow them. And there's nothing wrong with having, the person who you view as kind of your most important influence. But at the end of the day, you need to understand that you can't just copy them. Their business is different than yours. You're going to need to learn from other people and implement pieces from various people's marketing. And when you start thinking about that, in my niche, it's very simple, easy to see, right? Because there are influencers who, each of them has their own niche. So there are people who are specialists in courses, like that's what they teach people to do. There are people who are all about challenges and how to run challenges. There are people who are all about Instagram. There are people who are all about Facebook groups. There are people who are all about coaching. And, you need to be a full stack person, someone who understands all these concepts, right? And makes a decision about what's right for your business. You can't just copy them. You're going to have to take it and put the pieces together. So that was one of my big lessons that I learned this year. And I hope that you've got that too. You need to build a business that is unique. It is yours. You can cut and paste parts from other people, but it's not cookie cutter. You're going to have to think through how it works for your business. Now, the second big lesson I learned is you have to listen more than you talk. And this is another big part of what B School did for me. I mentioned that signing up for Marie Forleo's B School was a huge change in my business. Before that, I was cocky. I thought I knew what my customers needed, so I was going to tell them what they needed, and I was going to sell them what they needed. I didn't take the time to actually listen to them. I didn't take the time to figure out what do they actually want. So I was selling the wrong thing. I wasn't selling them the solution they needed. I was selling them what I thought they needed. And that was never going to work. It was only once I started listening to them that I was able to make a shift. So I am a big believer in listen more than you talk. And what that means for you is there's some where it's directly ask them the questions. So I ask surveys now. When I got done with a promo for my template library launch, and I sent an email to everyone who didn't buy, who went through the series and said, hey, why, it was the do you hate me email, but I was basically asking them, why didn't you buy? And I got tons of feedback. And so the great thing is I'm going through that and I'm going to, really listen and understand, because I could have thought through everything. But when I looked through this, I realized some of it was, that I hadn't messaged things right. Some of it was, these issues that I couldn't control. Some of it was issues I could control. So I continue to do that in an active way. But there's also the passive way. I hang out with a lot of my ideal customers. I spend time in Facebook groups with them. I get on Facebook Lives that these influencers do just to listen. I listen to the podcast they listen to because it allows me to listen and hear language. So again, ironically, I listen to a lot of podcasts that are directed towards women because a lot of my clients are women. And so I listen to these because it is what is in their ears. It's what my customers are hearing. And these are people who I know has spent time doing it. So it's a way for me to listen and start hearing and understanding. You need to do the same thing for your market. Whatever your market is, find where they hang out and listen. And just listen. Be a fly on the wall for a while. And then ask questions and build relationships. But ultimately, that listening will pay off in unreal ways. And then the final lesson I've learned is that relationships matter. This is a lonely business sometimes. And being an entrepreneur is hard. And so having people that you can walk the journey with will make things so much easier. Now, I've built some relationships with people. And again, these are people, some of them, I've met, which is great. I've met them once, maybe twice, if I'm lucky in person. But I've talked to them, I talk to them on Facebook. I talk to them on the phone. We jump on Zoom sometimes, but we support each other. And so that is important. And having that peer network is important. But that's one part of relationships. But quite honestly, the more important thing, and one of the most important pieces you can have, is to build relationships with influencers. That can be a huge game changer for your business. And you do it, you have to do it the right way. But if you think about it, if you're able to build a relationship with one influencer, and that influencer decides to promote you or become an affiliate, it can alter your business in fundamental ways that you can't ever imagine. That first influencer is the hardest one, but once you get that, it can be much easier. My business changed in fundamental ways because I forged that relationship with Amy Porterfield, was in her group, was giving, was doing all the right things. And she then had me on her podcast. When she had me on her podcast to talk about GDPR, all of a sudden, I stopped being a random lawyer that people had never heard of. All of a sudden, I was that lawyer on Amy Porterfield's podcast. She's had me on again. And, I continue to contribute to her group, and she says things that are just glowing about me. So all of a sudden, I have this, I have a different presence in people's mind because of that one influencer deciding that she wanted to give me, some little bit of, being able to be on her platform to offer value to her people. And so, what I'll say is I lucked into it this year. I didn't, I wasn't being systematic about it. I should have been, but I wasn't. Whereas, now I am. I'm being very systematic about it. I'm thinking about it. I'm, for next year, I'm really thinking through how to continue to build more relationships like that. And as you can imagine, now things are easier for me, right? Because now, I kind of have that, imprimatur of, I'm the person who, I'm that lawyer who Amy has on her podcast. And so that gives me that intro and that ability to get an in that I wouldn't have otherwise had. But the lesson I would tell you is you need to be intentional about that. Find the influencers in your space and try to build relationships. And it has to be a truly, you find ways to give to them and to support them. And once you do that, if you just do it and keep showing up, you'll build that relationship and it will pay off. So that's my 2018 recap. The good, the bad, what I did right, what I did wrong, the fact that I sadly often, had to wait 8 or 9 months before I figured things out, all my missteps along the way. But it has been a fantastic year. I'm excited. There are some other things that I still haven't done that I'm going to talk about next week. And one of the biggest missteps I'll tell you is I'm still trying to do this by myself. I'm still in the process of getting that VA that I've mentioned many times that I'm trying to get set up. And that's just monumentally stupid of me, to be honest with you. But it is what it is. And I recognize that. And I recognize that because I haven't gotten that done yet, I'm doing things that I shouldn't be doing this year. So when we talk next week, next week, I'm going to be talking about, what is my planning process for the year to come? Meaning, what do I have in mind? What do I have planned? What are my goals? What are my intentions for next year? That's what we're talking about next week. And so obviously I'm going to talk about that. Getting that piece of my business figured out is a big missing gap. But so we'll talk about that next week. And I'm going to really give you, more on what I'm thinking, and you'll understand where I'm going this year. I should say next year in 2019. So I hope you're enjoying the show. If so, and if you haven't yet, I make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And also, if you're enjoying it, I would love for you to give me a rating or review over on iTunes or Stitcher or however you're getting this. That way other people see it and other people will get to follow it as well. And don't forget to join the community, the Online Genius podcast community, by heading over to youronlinegenius.com/community. Again, those loops I keep talking about. I'd love to have you as part of the Facebook group where, you can ask me questions, we can interact, we can really get to know each other. And it's not just me talking to you, it's us having a conversation with each other, which is what I really want to be doing. So that's it. And I'll see you back here next week for episode 57 of the Online Genius podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Online Genius podcast. Make sure to tune in next week for more great tips, tricks, and strategies to help you build and protect your online genius.